In this video article, we're going to look at Earle Stanley Gardner's 9-step story model. Before we dive in, if you want to get an email with a time-stamped overview every time I release a new video, then head over to my website at deliberate-practice.com. You can sign up there for my email list. There's other content at that website, and in the weeks and months to come, there will be much more in the way of email subscriber-only content as a thank you for signing up. So go over there and do that. Let's start by looking at who was Earle Stanley Gardner, in case you don't know him or don't know much about him. He was a prolific mystery and crime writer, and at his peak he used to write a book every 4 to 6 weeks. We'll talk about how he did that in a moment. His most famous creation was a detective called Perry Mason. I think he wrote over 80 Perry Mason books in his lifetime. Gardner passed away in 1970, so he has not been with us for quite a while, but his legacy still lives on in his books, and there are still films being made and TV shows being made from his characters. At one point, and this figure came from a book I'll tell you about in a moment, at around 1980, there were over 300 million copies of his books had been sold. At that point in time, he was the best-selling American author of all time. His books were translated into multiple languages, sold all over the world. And one of his secrets for his productivity was he used dictation to write 100,000 words a month, and at one point he employed 7 secretaries for transcribing his audio. Obviously, he passed away in 1970. There was no voice to text then, so he used, and he was using dictation from the mid-1930s, I think. So again, there's a book I'll mention in a minute which has got more details on some of the technical details if you're interested in that. He also created a fiction factory approach to writing, and we're going to talk about more aspects of that. So what he did to be so productive was he developed these systematic writing techniques. So he had plotting notebooks, character development charts, story wheels, all sorts of tools that he used to help him plot stories. And one of those notebooks they had was called Formulae for Writing a Mystery. And there's a collection at Texas University called the Gardner Collection. And I think the figure of the number of items that they have collected, which he donated to them, is in like the multiple millions. Like it's the figure I read was over 30 million items, which is an astonishing amount of items. And a lot of that material has, or not a lot of it, if it's 36 million items, but some of the primary pieces of information from that material have been excerpted in the following book. This book is called Secrets of the World's Best-Selling Writer, subtitled Storytelling Techniques of Earle Stanley Gardner. Great cover, actually. I'm going through, at the moment, an interest in covers, more for thumbnails for YouTube. A few comments have said my thumbnails are really boring and dull, and I should try and make them better. So I've been exploring that. But I quite like that as a book cover, and you can see the authors are Frances L. and Roberta B. Fugate. This book I looked just before I started recording this video. On Amazon UK, you could buy a copy of the book. I think a paperback copy was £15, and a Kindle ebook version was something like £7.50. So maybe $10 in the US if you're looking in the US. So it's readily available. It didn't used to be readily available. I've got a hardback copy, which I bought in 2018, 2017, 2018. And I think I paid £70 or £80 for my copy, because at that point in time, that was the only way you could get hold of it. And it's a really interesting book. And before I go on and detail the 9 steps of the story model, which is only a very small part of the book, and you should definitely go check it out, to give you more information that you may be able to use to create your own writing systems and processes. For a long time, I didn't write any fiction. I mean, we're talking 20 years, something like that, or close to 20 years. And one of the things that I did to avoid writing fiction was believe that there was a holy grail of fiction plotting out there that if I could just discover that suddenly I'd be able to write 1,000,000 novels in 10 days kind of thing. And now that I'm older and wiser, the truth of the matter is probably the Holy Grail is within you, in terms of you are your own unique personality, so you will bring that personality to bear on how you create fiction, whether it's short form or long form. However, there is still benefit to be gained from reading how different people, different writers, and obviously Earle Stanley Gardner wrote over 100 books. I don't know the exact figure. I don't think it's been tallied, but he wrote numerous other series as well as Perry Mason, and had at least one other pseudonym. So maybe he wrote 200 books in his lifetime. So he certainly was a productive writer. So you can learn from other people and other systems and other plotting methods, but do not ever confuse reading and learning as writing. You only get writing done by sitting your ass in a seat and putting words on the page. So if you are going to research and look for things like this, try and make it something. Try and split your day so you have, and I did a video on the golden hour concept from Stephen Barnes. You have a golden hour where all you do is you write your fiction. It doesn't have to be 60 minutes. You might only get 30 minutes, but have a period of time where you write every day, and then have other periods of time where you can look at information like this. So don't mistake searching for information as being something that is leading to your writing. Only writing will further your actual writing. And yes, by all means, you can find new information and develop your process, but don't use the search for other people's processes thinking that there's some kind of holy grail. Don't let that derail you from putting your words on the page. Okay, that caveat over with. Let's quickly go through the 9 steps. And Gardner very much emphasized that it was very fluid, and so some of these steps could be got through very quickly and provide information for the outline, and some could expand to provide much more detail, and depending on what size book you are aiming to write. So step 1 is the act of primary villainy. So answer these questions. What's the central crime or wrongdoing that's going on in your story? When and where does it occur? Who commits it? Why do they commit it? And remember, Gardner was a crime writer, so this is very crime-centric. However, there are ways that you could take this process and adapt it for other genres, way beyond the scope of this video, but just so you know that that is possible. Step 2, the motivation for the villainy. Now, Gardner had, I think one of his, I mentioned that he had various plot wheels and various story wheels. He had 8 of them. You read the book to find out more, but one of them was categories of villainy. So it might be for material gain, e.g. money, property, inheritance. It might be for revenge. It might be personal, it might be professional, might be romantic. Could be for silence or cover up, prevent exposure of crimes. Or it could be love and passion, maybe removing rivals, things like that. So you can see already that if you work through just these 2 steps, you'll start to gain a lot of insight and build up a lot of detail that will eventually end up in the story in some way. And I think the reason that Gardner started with the crime is because with a crime story, the object of the story is to solve the crime. So by starting with the crime, he creates the things like the motivation, who's done it, why they've done it, all that kind of stuff before we even get to the hero. And obviously, if you're writing like a series character like Perry Mason, who was a detective, Gardner also had a series character who was a district attorney. So similar kind of thing, but from a slightly different angle. They then come into that, come into the story, and we, the reader, don't know any of this information, but you, the author, would, if you were writing and following this kind of system that Gardner created. Another motivation, justice. Is the criminal have a vigilante mentality? Is he killing people who he thinks are bad and deserving of it, and thinks he's doing it for the greater good? And especially in Gardner's later stories, things were not black and white. There was very much a lot of nuance with characters and shades of grey. So just so you know that. Step 3, the villain's cover-up. So how does the villain attempt to hide the crime? What false clues does the villain plant? What alibis are created? Who do they try to frame? So again, we're layering on answers to the crime has been committed. We know what it is. We find out what the motivations are. How is the villain going to hide it? Because obviously, when the hero comes into the story, if there's been a murder, let's say, and he finds the villain within 10 minutes, say there's a gun at the scene of the crime with the villain's fingerprints on, and then DNA analysis from the crime scene points to the villain, and then there's CCTV footage of the villain, that story is going to be over in 5 minutes. So all these things help confuse the issue for the reader and for the detective, and create complications in the story. Step 4, initial complications. What goes wrong with the villain's cover-up? What unexpected witnesses appear? What evidence surfaces? How do innocent parties get involved? So again, by answering these questions, you're building up a detailed layer of backstory that will surface into the actual story once the hero appears. And that's in step 5, when the hero makes contact with villainy. And again, Gardner had a list of contact methods. So for each story, he would choose one. So it might be direct victim-client approach. So depending on the crime, the victim turns up at the detective's office and says, hey, this has happened. The Maltese Falcon famously starts like that. Accidental discovery. Maybe the detective comes across a crime in the process of his daily life. Professional duties. Similar thing. He might be a detective, a lawyer, district attorney, and get involved with the crime through his professional duties, or he might have a personal connection to the victim. So you can see, when you start layering all of these ideas on top of each other, there's an infinite number of stories that can be told, starting out from the same kind of method, which is, I'm guessing, how Gardner was able to produce so much fiction in his lifetime. Also, the hero could witness suspicious activity which could draw him into the story and the case, depending on what the hero's role is and how he relates to the case. Step 6, character conflicts, further complications. Again, Gardner had a set of complicating circumstances. For example, witnesses can be killed, bribed, or intimidated. Hero could be mistaken for the villain. Evidence could point to innocent parties. Authority figures could oppose the hero. And all of those things could happen depending on how detailed you want the story to be and how many, So all of these steps could be used. Some of them have got their own levels of nuance, and you could have secondary villains. So a villain could commit a crime, and an authority figure might want to stop the hero, whoever that is, from uncovering the villain, because maybe the villain's blackmailing the authority figure, or maybe the villain is the authority figure's daughter or son. There's all sorts of ways these things can interconnect and interweave to make really complex stories, or they can be kept a little simpler for more simple stories, depending on what kind of writer you are. Personal relationships could also be threatened to be a complicating circumstances. And again, if this starts to be of interest for you, I would recommend you buy the book that I showed a few slides ago, because this will go into all of this material at greater depth and give you more ideas. Step 7, suspense through the hero's mistakes. So what wrong conclusions does the hero draw? And with something like that, you can have that the villain has left clues that will lead the hero to go down blind alleys, or like red herrings, but a bit more subtle than that. And these make interesting subplots if the hero suspects a person who it isn't and who the reader suspects, and then when we find out that that person's not the villain, the hero's got to retrace his steps, find out where he's made wrong conclusions, and again, all of these things layer on top of each other, and you can create detailed and nuanced stories by answering all these questions. What false leads does the hero follow? How does the hero's actions help the villain in any way? What personal flaws of the hero can create problems while he's investigating this case? So again, all of these things they're not strict blueprint points. They're ideas and questions that you answer, and based on what you've answered before, it starts to build up an interesting and nuanced story that's come by using these starters or questions as almost like they're prompting you as if you were an AI. So think of these maybe as a version of UGPT, where you put these things in a document and then you answer them, and as the document evolves, all of these, so the personal flaws, for example, how do these create problems? They'll be very different in a detective hero who's an alcoholic than a detective hero who's being blackmailed. So they work for so many different stories on so many different levels. Step 8, villains escalating escape attempts. How does the villain adapt to new threats that obviously the hero is bringing towards him? What additional crimes does he commit to try and throw the hero off track? Who else is endangered by this? What desperate measures does the villain take? Because obviously as the hero takes his own steps to try and uncover the crime, the villain will be watching from a distance, and he may feel threatened as he thinks the hero's getting closer, and there's all sorts of things they can do to try and complicate the hero's job. So they might steal evidence from, or have evidence tampered with. There's all sorts of things that can be done. Remember, these questions aren't designed to take you down a specific kind of story route. They're designed for you to come up with ideas that all layer on top, and you come up with a very unique story at the end of it. The final step, solution and trap. How does the hero finally come to see the truth? What trap do they set for the villain? What climatic confrontation occurs? How is justice served? Sometimes in some stories, presumed innocent, Scott Turow, justice isn't actually ever served in that story, and in some stories you get that kind of conclusion where the villain may not get away with it 100%, but he or she, it's a she in presumed innocent, may not go to prison for various reasons, and how that happens will reflect your worldview in some ways. If you see the world in black and white and you think evil should be punished or bad deeds should be punished, that will be reflected in how justice is served. If you see the world in more shades of grey, then maybe the villain will be uncovered, but maybe justice won't be served to them in the strict, you're going to court, now you're going to prison. It might be served in some other way. So again, this is really nuanced. And if you use these as kind of questions and prompts, what should emerge is something that's true to your story sense and how you see the world. And that should come out in the answers and then the story that you develop from using these questions as a prompting method to get to answers. And you should be able to take the document that you create by answering all these questions, and then take that and use that as a blueprint for a very unique store, or I hate saying very unique. Something's either unique or it's not unique. A story that's unique to you and your worldview. So it's a really interesting model that Gardner had going on. It was definitely successful for him. I recommend the book again, the Fugate book. I'll put a reminder of the title in the link underneath this description. Closing out, remember, finding your process is one of the hardest jobs that every beginner writer faces. And once you've developed your process, then maybe you will end up like Stanley Gardner, and you'll produce a book a month, or a book every 6 weeks, or a book every 3 months. But initially, the hardest job is finding a process that works for you. And maybe Gardner's fluid plot structure may be something that does help you. And I do recommend, again, getting a copy of Fugate's book. But I also reiterate the caveat: don't mistake reading story models and how to write stories and books like that. Don't mistake that for writing activity. You should still be writing, even if you're trying to discover your process at this point in time. You can be writing short stories and using writing short stories as part of the way of uncovering your writing process. So finding out if you like to write crime, or you like to write thrillers, or you like to write mysteries, or you like to write romance, or fantasy, or sword and sorcery, or whatever, science fiction, whatever your particular genre is, writing short stories can help you find that. And then you can, going from genre, you can go, are you a discovery writer? Are you an outliner? Do you use both? How do you use both? And the process builds from there. You can build that process from there. And you can still be researching and trying to refine it by finding new information. There's always new information to be found, but don't let that distract you from getting fictional words on the page. If you are at this point in your writing journey where you're an aspiring and or frustrated fiction writer, I've got a resource I'm putting together called The Writing Vault. You can see the URL there. It'll be in the description below this video. This resource is aimed at frustrated and or aspiring fiction writers, so go and check that out, see what you think. If you've got any questions on that or on this video, then just drop me an email, paul@deliberate-practice.com, and I'll get back to you. It's much easier now that I've got 65 or 66, whatever it is, videos on YouTube. It's much easier for me to answer questions sent to me via email than answer questions that are left on comments. Finding new comments on YouTube's videos, or on my videos on YouTube, is starting to become quite difficult with the amount of videos that I've published and promoted. So that's this video. Thank you for your time watching this. I hope it was of interest for you. The Fugate book is definitely worth checking out. So thank you again, and I'll catch you in the next video.